Welcome to Speak Sex. I am your host, Eurydice. I am still in quarantine in Miami Beach. We are in the middle of this pandemic, which feels brand new to us, but it's like not new in the history of our humankind. My guest today is in DC. Her name is Kimberly Pendleton. And Kimberly Rose, she's a sexual empowerment coach and a PhD in sexology from George Washington University. She got her master's from Yale, and she's a certified sexual coach, and she specializes in women's empowerment, feminism, sexuality, sexual healing, the healing of sexual trauma through sexual experience. So my understanding of it, she'll speak to it, I'm sure, for the next hour, is the turning around, right? The kind of like, I'm going to say psychic alchemy that happens when we manage to turn our trauma into power. And how, it's easier said than done. It sounds actually so lovely, right? Like most metaphors do. but the work on the ground within one's psyche, of finding a way to not be threatened by what hurt you and instead embrace it and find yourself in that is major. So welcome to the podcast, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are known because you set up this community for women who are, sexually, let's say, brave and eager, called Uncover. And you do workshops, retreats. You have a group. I think you'll tell us all about it. That's how I heard about you. And what interests me right now, and I know that that's just my own personal interest, but I would like to weave it in the conversation, is, the word uncovered, being a linguist of all things that create meaning, that changes the way we live our lives, right? So we have a language, basically, that creates our social conditioning, because it creates our brain just as we learn to speak, and then we go from there. So I hear uncovered, and I don't know if that was your intention, but to me, it reminds me of taking off the veil. Which is actually the true meaning of the apocalypse, the revelation.
Yes.
So many people are like, we're in the middle of an apocalypse. And, so to me, the word uncovered is something that has had heavy meaning for women for thousands of years, right? And it was always the body or the face or the... Or both, but for sure the head of the woman that was covered for reasons of, shame, which was really control of the feminine by, her keepers, her father, her family, her tribe, the chief, the husband, of course, eventually. I remember both of my grandmas never left the house without some sort of headgear on. And, nowadays in the, late 20th, early 21st century, we kind of associated with one religion. But really, like, all of those Judeo-Christian religions had that tradition at some point or other. The Jews, the Christians, mine were Orthodox Christians, the Muslims, of course. It's one of the kind of like visual cues of a woman who is controlled. So I have felt like, wow, with this pandemic, it's like, it's almost like us women telling the guys, join our apocalypse. It's like for the first time, this is like a gender neutral experience, right?
Totally.
I know. And it's like, let them try to go jogging in a mask for like a while, let
Yeah.
let gender men, like, uh, get to experience what it has been like to be a woman for so many generations, going
Right.
around with your face covered, your mouth covered, you can't be heard properly, you can't breathe, take like a full breath, and you're supposed to live your life like that in public, which is why so many women traditionally have chosen to just be in like women's quarters, basically
Right.
like now, right, in physical
Right.
social isolation, where they can be like free and uncovered.
Mm.
And I'm sure, I mean, they haven't done a kind of anthropological study of this, and I guess it's not urgent, but I am sure, without a doubt, that it's much easier for the women of the world to go through this than men, because we have an experience both genetically, generationally, I mean, but also even in pregnancy, women kind of
Yeah.
like take to their bed, or after giving birth, they stay home. We're kind of used to being forced to be kept.
To stay inside.
To
That
be
is such a good
kept
point.
women inside. Yeah, kept out of circulation.
Yeah. You're
So,
so right.
right. So it's like it took a pandemic.
Oh my gosh.
But
Yes.
there is a sweet pleasure in all of that. Definitely. It's like, how do you like it, men of the Western world?
Right, right. And you can see already they're reacting
Oh my
like,
God, they're going
oh my
nuts.
gosh, my freedom's being taken away with any restrictions on their bodies, their movement, what they can do and say outside. And I think you're absolutely right. It's like, okay, welcome to the party.
This is what you expected from us, right? For so long, so that we could be like good. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a tiny experience for them, because of course, it's not enforced. In the East, it's more enforceable, in autocratic regimes. But here, I guess they can just do what they want. But it's a tiny experience of like the Free the Nipple, campaign, and everybody was like, "What's wrong with them?" All these crazy women. It's like, well, I don't know. The guys get to show their little like useless nipples all the time, and no one looks again, and that's that. And we have nipples that actually like give life, and we have to keep them covered or be shamed,
Right.
shamed in crazy ass ways.
Yep.
And then because of all that emphasis on all that, we end up like having surgery and pain and enhancement to make it look a certain way. Like, why is this happening only to our gender? It makes no sense, in a feminist or supposedly like, equalitarian society. So anyway, Uncovered. Tell us a little bit about, what Uncovered is, your members, where you're going with it, and maybe your inspiration for the name.
Yes. Well, I love that you brought up the true meaning, or at least etymology, of apocalypse, because I think you're right. Not all of us know that. I certainly haven't always known that, but that it's really that uncovering. And it feels like there is something I notice with my clients and in myself, that the true uncovering did require a willingness to kind of destroy your life, not to be, so intense about it, but it really has felt that way, where I think about the moments where sexual liberation or encountering a deeper experience of your own pleasure, it feels to most of my clients, and has felt to me, like that move is so dangerous. It's going to ruin my life. And it's sort of true, like a lot of things won't stay in place if you really start to listen to that voice, or heal your sexuality, or be bolder, be stronger. And, that's usually exactly what needs to happen for something new to be built instead that is more free. So it's like things will fall apart and then they'll come back together, and it all ends up feeling ultimately better because you're not living under this kind of shroud of shame and guilt and thinking that everything you do has to be perfect, and this kind of very fragile way of being. So I love, first of all, that you just immediately picked up on that. And I think that the wordplay is absolutely relevant, of like, we see these conversations around literally women being covered up, whether it's, modesty, purity culture and evangelical Christianity, or discussions about the veil, thinking about even like nuns and Hasidic Jewish women, and, kind of all the different ways that women cover, especially their hair and faces, as you were saying. And that kind of on the flip side, there's also this deeper layer of covering up that even, if you're not covering your head in that literal way, you might still be covering up in all these other ways, just trying to be good, as you said, be the good woman, the good mom, the good wife, fit into any of these rules. That ends up getting really destabilized if you start to uncover too much, both literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's a kind of like, for us, it's always been like so visible,
Right.
I do feel that men are covered too, because this
Sure.
this whole masculinity keeps them like under that, what do you call it? Like, let's say the armor,
Yeah.
the armor of manhood. And they do, get to pay a price, a price in social status if like they take on the tropes of femininity. But it's separate, topic. But yeah, for sure they're veiled by their, masculine setup. Like whatever.
You're
I'm
so
a
right.
warrior, and I can only act this way, and I can only wear this way, and so my vanity would be feminine. So I'm like empowered by my, whatever. Rawness, my machismo, my lack of effort with my appearance, all of that.
You're so right, though. And, I think it is worth exploring together, in the sense that the more we uncover ourselves or make space, doing our own work, it really can kind of ripple out and set an example and kind of give permission to everyone around us, men included, that like maybe they don't need to stay so strictly adhering to the rules that they've been given either.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I feel that too, and that would have to be their motivation.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like open up a whole realm for them to play in. And yeah, I think that would be wonderful. But yeah, for women, which is your work currently, it's so much. It's so much. It takes a lot of like repetition, right, and work to actually unlearn this ingrained. It's not so much habits, but definitions of things, right? To kind of defy what we know, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think of it in this very helpful illustration with that language of covering up as like each kind of rule and layer is piled on top of your true self, that there is this kind of vibrant sexual being inside of each of us, and slowly and maybe sometimes quickly and through trauma and through socialization gets covered up kind of bit by bit. And so then the work of reclaiming her and like resuscitating her is less about trying to become someone new, or become something else, but more about stripping away that stuff so that you're uncovering the real you instead.
Yeah.
And I don't think it means that we all each have this kind of like secret essence that is pure or anything like that. But I do think that like, you know, you can start to get the tools to see, okay, which of these do I want to keep and which were put on me, you know, and then like, I might let some of that go. And really then that's what I consider to be like an empowered moment where you get to really decide like, okay, I want this. I'm going to let that fall to the trash and then I'm going to keep going here. And I loved what you said as you were introducing me about, you know, one of the pieces of this that I think sometimes gets overlooked is pleasure as a tool for helping you discern which of these layers, you know, you want to keep and which were put on you that you want to strip away. I think being guided by pleasure as an analytic and as a way of thinking about our truth is something that we're only just now getting comfortable with again. You know, I think it feels like it's been so dangerous, but I love it as a tool and it's quite disruptive in some ways.
Yes, it is. I agree. I definitely think it's like a practice of resistance. I don't want to go as far as say revolutionary, but yeah, close. Yeah, because you know the whole like patriarchy setup. I mean, patriarchy may not be everybody's favorite word. So whatever their favorite word is for an authority that may be too much on them. That authority, you know, starts with the Judeo-Christian split, right? Of body and mind. And we don't even want to say the word starts because I don't know where it started. Maybe it started in ancient Babylonia. Maybe it's older than the Bible. I don't know. But I know it coincides with the primacy of like the masculine, and it coincides with what we know as history, written records, right? So at some point, that all came up together, and Eve, my namesake, got a little bit of the knowledge, and that made her like a bad rebel, first human. And so, her husband, boyfriend, mate as well, was punished as well as Eve, the thief, right? And got kicked out of like the permanent garden because she kind of understood, she learned about mortality. I think it's what it is. She learned about sex and death, right? The two big things here that we're having issues with, as humans.
Always. Perpetual issues.
Right. Knowing that we're going to die, we can't handle that, even though we know it. And, knowing that we come out of each other, out of women, that's too much.
Yeah.
Right? Too much. Yeah. So, trying to kind of find ways to, disempower those two things or make them like less real. So they come out and they feel, because they feel shame for the first time, right? And that's our original sin, or whatever you want to call it, different faiths, different beliefs, atheist, schmatheist. To me, it makes no difference. Somewhere deep in you, that dichotomy, is strong and well and alive, because that's how we all understand language. We know your mind versus your body. My body wants me to do this, but I know better, right? My pleasure, this may make me feel good, but I know that like what I think, how I think matters more. What other people think of me matters more, like, right? So that kind of like split in the heart of who we each are is there from our most formative moments. So what you're saying is, as you uncover each layer of conditioning, of lesson, of social, tribal conditioning, we get closer to that place of oneness, of self-union, where I am includes I am my body. Like the body, it's like a somatic unveiling. And if we could find a way, and it seems like that's what you just mentioned, to make analysis, study, knowledge, body-based, somatic-based, right? Physical experience-based, rather than analytical through reason, then we kind of work on evening out that extreme imbalance where like the primacy of the thinking masculine or linguistic mind and the kind of low status of the instincts, the pleasure, the high of whatever orgasm or whatever it is, sensation. So yeah, bringing that pleasure to the same kind of status, let's say, as thought and reasoning, right? That's amazing. To me, that's revolutionary.
I completely agree. And it's, what should we say? I mean, it really ruffles feathers. And I wonder if we could think about why that is. Like what could it be? In some ways, this most innocuous thing, pleasure, shouldn't really be so challenging and confronting, but we see over and over that it really is. And I wonder why that is, why that would be so confronting to the status quo.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's experientially, I understand why, because, everything we've been taught comes in. The moment you actually experience it, you feel that, you've just demoted yourself. If you could only say like, the PhD, professor, you would like be so much more comfortable with your fancy social positioning.
Right.
Than if you become, if you are, a leader of like women's workshops where they all, sit in a circle naked and masturbate. And then that's like, wait, that just went down to, socially, like, what do I tell my parents I'm doing, right? So
totally.
but that's like really deep. It's deep. That's why
absolutely
it's kind of a revolution, sexual revolution to me, because it involves undoing those feelings of extreme vulnerability and exposure. It's almost like our mind is our veil. It's almost like as if our mind, all the the vast territory between our ears, all of our thoughts and lessons dress us up, So they are covering, our mask, and then when you remove the mask, and you're exposed, you just feel like so. Well, the truth is, you feel so human.
Yeah.
You have given up all of the social tropes that that you've created to define you, the stories and the the money and the different the branding.
Right.
Like your hair is a brand, your haircut, your eye makeup, your lipstick, your cheekbones, right? Your nails, your everything, what you wear, it's all kind of saying something. And when it's all gone and you're just like a naked, sweaty, human in the process of pleasure, you at the same time find yourself like extremely vulnerable because you're so like everyone, you're so common, and yet I think that's where our oneness exists, right? Our non-duality exists in that place of being common, of being the same as everyone.
You're so right. There's almost this intense vulnerability in being reminded of that. And I think that that's the profound discomfort in getting uncovered, as well as the promise of it, and why it would feel exciting but also like you might die.
Yeah, and that's why people like you are there to help, to lead, to coach, to support, to say, like we had teachers teaching us all through school how to be, to fit in that repressed way. So
Sure.
we're gonna need some sort of like mentors and teachers.
Right. Like a way out of all this.
Yeah.
Let alone spaces like this podcast or the other spaces I'm sure you have too, where just we can talk about it at all, because so often you're getting silenced instead.
Yeah, we're getting silenced or devalued, or kind of, co-opted, turned into something else, objectified in some way. Oh, you are doing sex retreats. Oh, are you sexy yourself? Wait,
Right.
It's like, no, like, sex is not sexiness. It's like
right.
Talking about sex or teaching about sex isn't having sex. I'm not having sex with everyone in this retreat.
Right.
I think
I would charge a lot more.
I know. I mean, if you are, that's cool. But like, that is one way. But I don't know that we're evolved enough to kind of trust that way.
Sure, not quite yet. Maybe that's where we're headed. But no, I know what you mean. It's almost like you can't even think about sex without it being about consumption in that way, or pleasing in this kind of objectified gaze way. And that, I think, is part of what makes it feel so dangerous, but also so enticing when you think about doing that work just for yourself or just for your own pleasure, kind of like figuring out what your own pleasure, quote unquote, could even possibly mean, since so many of us are actively trained not to know. And I think that it really gets at the heart of it, that like there would immediately be an evaluation, or like, oh, well, do I get to have sex with you or something like that? And it's like part of the symptom of what we're fighting against in some ways is thinking of it only in that one-dimensional way, rather than as something that doesn't happen to you, but something that you get to have.
Yeah, exactly. The agency. Yeah. And also the becoming, coming out of being an object. I think part of this uncovering, I think that's, I have a little pet theory. I've thought through the years about the kind of like classic, infamous Salome dance, and how Salome, right, the taking off of the seven veils. And I have, and then when she's naked, men like surrender, whatever, that's like the setup as it's presented to us. And I feel that surrender that they're afraid of, where they lose their mind, right, and they will agree to anything. I feel that surrender is the surrender to the true self. It's the surrender to like you're naked, exposed. She's just exposed. She's just a naked woman. There is nothing special about her except the fact that she is able to choose to be naked in front of men who she's not married to. And I feel that is what kind of like, disempowers everyone in that fable, in that story. So that's like the uncoveredness becomes an extreme revelation for both, for the one looking, for the one gazing, and for the one being gazed or doing the uncovering. So it's a danger that goes both ways. And if both parties or whoever is there, if it's a group, the group, treat it with respect and consciousness, it can be transformative. So if the gazer, if the viewer, if the one who is not doing the uncovering
Mm-hmm.
Does not take advantage, does not rape and loot and
Right.
and
Harm.
pillage.
Yeah.
then that the participation is shared. Doesn't matter who is unveiling and who is not. You don't both have to do it simultaneously. So like if you are there as a guide, I feel that you yourself experience this kind of the power, the transformative power of letting go.
Right.
And if you share in your sister's unveiling in some other way in your, in group, yeah, and that's very therapeutic. So tell me a little, if I remember correctly, in your bio, you were religious and you were in a marriage, and so a lot of your, change and entering this path happened in the process of the dissolution of your marriage.
That's right. My own uncovering, you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great memory. It just, like so many women, I had this experience of being in a religious community that I actually deeply loved, and didn't feel particularly oppressed by or anything like that. But pleasure and sexuality was a huge missing piece. And it was not part of what was allowed, not expressly forbidden so much as just not talked about. And then certainly not part of what, as a woman, you were allowed to ask for. And so when I was married, and I got married young, I just found myself not knowing what my pleasure even looked like, like how would I even begin to ask for it? What would it mean if I were to want more?
How old were you when you got married?
I was 23.
Okay, yeah.
And
yeah, you were a virgin, or at least a virgin other than with this partner that you married?
We had waited to have sex before marriage. And so even though I was already a feminist and I was already active in all these ways, there was this piece around sexuality and spirituality that just felt kind of like you couldn't have one. You couldn't have what you wanted. In fact,
right.
I remember feeling like it's probably best to not even really know what you want, because then you maybe are selfish and greedy or something like that. And it was just like a really interesting thing to navigate and to think about kind of what the role of pleasure could be in destabilizing a situation like that, even though that was never my intention, but that's what happened. When I started to listen to that voice, that was like, well, I think I want a little more. And it ended up being quite a problem.
So your husband was also a Christian or a religious practitioner with the same?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And, it's in a way like it's a sad story for me sometimes, because there are things, of course, that I would have done differently. I didn't have, if I had had like the tools that now I create, I think I could have learned a language to talk about what I needed and figure out how to get it without necessarily blowing the whole thing up. But at the time, like, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I needed more. And so I left, and it was a huge betrayal. And then, as I did my own healing over the next 10 years and figured out what the role was of pleasure in my kind of true expression, I was able to sort of look back and see like, oh, you weren't bad and selfish. You just like needed a way to think about these things that wasn't available at the time. And, what's been really amazing is that some of the other women that I was in close contact with in that phase of my life have reached out since then. And some have even joined some of my programs, because whether they, and, I never thought, I was I was pretty much kicked out, rightfully so, because I was a danger. But I never thought that day would come where it would feel like we really got to have some resolution. And for the other women in the group, they were finally like, we want pleasure too. Like, we want more. We don't necessarily all need to go get divorced, but we want this to feel better.
Yeah. So I hope that we're able to take advantage of this moment of, of traumatic kind of unrest to learn
absolutely
collectively, before we go on with our lives, to learn to kind of avoid the extreme compartmentalization of modern life, where we work in our tiny little categories, and we have sex in our tiny categories,
right?
And we identify, in our tiny little pronouns, and that's that. and try all of our other kind of like capacities. Just try them out. But yeah, I think that a trauma, an extreme discomfort and a sort of psychic disease or physical disease, like COVID isn't now, and like, like you experienced in your marriage that brought on the divorce. I experienced the same many times in my life. And each time of such, extreme discomfort where I had to leave everything and just run away, so to speak, and start over, taught me a lesson, a very big lesson about knowing who I am and what my hard limits are, and how to share that with the people I love, to rework the writing. And that's what I call speak sex. It's basically the same thing. You would like to share with your partner who you're becoming, the new words, the new terms, the new meanings that you have discovered about yourself in the process of just being alive and living life and getting experience and getting older and wiser a little bit, and putting that in the script of the original vows or promises. And that should be our understanding of language, of our words, that they keep changing. And we can't just this idea of like, my word is my, I'll do anything to keep my word, is just not realistic. And it's another kind of masculine thing.
Totally.
But it's not real life.
Right.
Especially
right. And
when you're like 24 and you have no experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the name Speak Sex because of that very thing. You're really honoring the truth, which is that our words and our understanding, especially of ourselves, is evolving. And, there is an integrity to staying in curiosity around what's true for me right now. Who am I right now? Knowing that the answers to that can change, especially if you're 24.
Yeah. And honoring, I mean, I'm kind of like repeating what we were just saying, honoring and respecting the people you're with, the other, enough to trust them, to be able to hear and understand.
I love that.
Right? And take you in, instead of just giving up on them and
right.
And saying, well, someone knew, if I start over with someone else, I'll know the words better. And, where in fact, even if you start over with someone else and the original wording is better, because you understand yourself as you now are better, in time, the same thing will most likely happen again. You'll reach a lack of understanding, and you'll have to explain all over again in new words. And then what happens? Do you like destroy that? It seems that trusting each other to speak and hear truth is a big game changer.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think that one of the things that feels so true about that is that there is more of like a responsibility and an invitation for us to know how to speak our own truth and our own selves so that we can continue to share it in a way that feels true. And that it's not about really being with the perfect person or starting over all the time, but just trusting yourself that you'll know the words, and trusting the people around you that they can hear it, and that in each moment you'll be able to uncover like what is real here and what needs to happen next.
Yes, exactly. And to do that, you should read the books, listen to these podcasts, take the classes, kind of like stay informed so that you see what speaks to you. You can kind of like be inventing it alone, late at night in bed or in your dream journal. Or
sure.
Language is something that we all make together. So kind of bringing yourself, participating and joining in and listening and speaking and sharing is all part of it. So that's where the value of all this, programming comes in, and why it's essential. I do definitely, my life's dream would be to have like a huge audience and, to be able to be heard by the people who need it the most, which is, not preaching to the converted, so to speak.
Right. Just talking to each other, all the people who agree with us.
Yeah. But actually being able to kind of like get this out to the ones who are still living their life as if there were no alternative, if this is the only way to communicate and function. And again, this time of like quarantine is a good time for that, because
right.
A lot of free time. So
you're absolutely right, and we have to go inside anyway. We may as well go all the way in.
Right. So tell me how some examples of the work that you do in your coaching, in your classes, in your in your retreats, in your research. Of you kind of like teach or help people use their pleasure and their desire to find, to overcome their shame and their scarring, and instead of like repress their sex appeal, to uncover it, something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, the main offer that I have, that I work with people in, is this online program that is a mix of tools and resources that they can watch and listen to, and then live coaching where they can ask questions. And there's a call each week on sexuality, and then a call each week on self-care, because, I find that they go hand in hand together. So being able to really explore, maybe a training on sexual trauma, and then to go watch like a training on pleasure, and then to join a call and be able to ask a question that maybe you've never been able to ask anyone before, and to have it be in community, which is of course scary for some people, and such a relief for most people too, because they're like, oh, I'm not alone. Like I'm not the only one that wondered this or that felt this way. So I love that online ability to bring us together across time and space. And then, of course, being in person is amazing, when we're allowed to again.
And how do people find you?
Yes, it's at theuncoveredwoman.com. So that's the site. That's where everything lives.
Yeah.
And, I love creating communities where we're able, just like you, where we're able to have these conversations, because I really think the more of that exists, if each of us goes out and then we create that community too, and then they're just a bunch, that would be my dream, where it's just the new normal, that these topics are not off limits, that women's pleasure is not off limits, that healing from trauma is not off limits, and that it would just become basically that we would work ourselves out of a job, you know, and then we could go sell flowers or something.
Yeah. Well, hallelujah. I don't expect it happening in my lifetime, but that's the dream. Yeah. And, you know, turning like talk therapy into a version of somatic therapy, you know, making language a little more in tune with like our physical and body reality.
Right.
And also being, you know, becoming conscious and staying conscious, you know, I think is a big part of it that's difficult, you know, because each time you uncover something, you may have missed something, right? So each time, you know, the work is not so easily undone. I mean, think of how many decades created this narrative of you that you associate with who you are. So yeah, you know, because like even now with the Zoom, you know, meetings, and I feel that, you know, online sexual coercion is possible. You know, virtual objectification is very possible. You know, like you can re-victimize yourself, re-objectify yourself, and think that you've dealt with that, and then you find yourself in a new situation.
Absolutely.
And it can just insidiously start again.
Yeah, you're so right. And I think it's all the more reason to really seek out spaces and resources like this podcast and others where we can all feel like we have tools to think through changing landscapes, even when we don't know what the changes will be next, you know, but we'll know more and more how to think about how we feel in them.
Right. And just, you know, kind of like committing to this process of truth finding and being like, on the side of truth in life is important. Yeah.
Yeah.
And healing. Yes. Thank you so much. So uncoveredwoman.com, which I love the name. I love everything it signifies. And thank you for doing that. And, you know, I'm going to definitely stay in touch with your career. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad to be connected to you and your work, and that we could just begin these conversations more and more, and keep directing people to one another, because it's such important overlap.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. It's so, you know, it creating a real community where we can be ourselves, without kind of lying to ourselves, I think is, you know, revelatory.
Absolutely. It really, really is.
It's like liberation.
Yeah. And we need it now more than ever.
Yes. So thank you, Kimberly, so much for sharing and being with us today. And thank you, everybody out there who is listening. And as always, believe Eve and keep speaking sex. If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.